She finally spoke, not with the noise of a stage or the sharpness of controversy, but with the calm weight of a woman who has lived long enough to see how the world mistakes speed for wisdom and attention for truth. Her voice did not rush. It did not shout. It did not beg to be believed. It arrived quietly, like something that has been waiting for the right moment, and when it arrived, it carried a warning that did not accuse the world, but invited it to pause. She is known to many as the mother of a man who seems to live ahead of time, a man whose name is spoken in the same breath as rockets, electric dreams, and futures that feel almost unreal. But she did not speak as his mother in the way the world expects. She spoke as a woman who has watched brilliance grow in the soil of hardship, who has seen fear dress itself as ambition, and who understands that behind every extraordinary story is a human cost the headlines never print. Her warning was not about technology, not about money, not about power. It was about something far more uncomfortable. It was about the way the world is forgetting how to be human while pretending it is becoming advanced. She said, in her own steady way, that the world is moving faster than the heart can follow. That we are teaching children how to compete before we teach them how to rest. That we praise exhaustion as if it were a badge of honor and shame stillness as if it were weakness. She spoke of a world obsessed with becoming someone, while slowly losing itself. She did not condemn ambition. She understands ambition deeply. She has watched it up close, watched it burn, watched it save, watched it nearly destroy. She knows ambition can build bridges to the future, but she also knows it can become a prison when it is no longer guided by meaning. Her warning was this: progress without wisdom is not progress at all. She reminded the world that brilliance does not grow in comfort. It grows in adversity, but it also requires grounding. She spoke of years when survival mattered more than success, when choices were not glamorous, when resilience was learned the hard way. She did not romanticize those years. She simply honored them, because they shaped something real. She warned that the world is becoming addicted to spectacle. We no longer ask, "Is this good?" We ask, "Is this impressive?" We no longer ask, "Is this right?" We ask, "Is this viral?" And in that shift, something precious is being lost. Her words carried a quiet urgency. She spoke of young people measuring their worth by numbers that were never meant to define a soul. Followers, likes, achievements, valuations. She warned that when identity becomes external, inner collapse is inevitable. She said the world is producing more anxiety than ever before, not because people are weak, but because they are being asked to live without roots. She spoke of fear, not the dramatic kind, but the subtle fear that drives people to prove themselves endlessly. The fear of being ordinary. The fear of being left behind. The fear of slowing down and discovering that silence might ask questions success cannot answer. She has seen what relentless drive looks like from the inside. She has seen the cost it demands from relationships, from health, from peace. She has seen how easily the world celebrates results while ignoring the sacrifices that made them possible. Her warning was not to stop dreaming, but to stop sacrificing the soul on the altar of achievement. She said something that stayed with many who listened closely: the future is not built only by those who move fast, but by those who know why they are moving at all. Without purpose, speed becomes chaos. Without values, intelligence becomes dangerous. She warned that technology, no matter how powerful, will never replace responsibility. That innovation without ethics is not progress, but risk disguised as brilliance. She urged the world to remember that every invention carries the fingerprint of the one who created it, and if the creator is disconnected from humanity, the creation will reflect that emptiness. She spoke as a mother, but also as a witness to history repeating itself in new forms. Empires rise, she said, not because they are strong, but because they believe they are invincible. And they fall not because they lack resources, but because they forget restraint. Her warning was gentle but firm: do not confuse intelligence with wisdom. Intelligence can solve problems. Wisdom knows which problems should be solved at all. She spoke of resilience, but not the kind that glorifies suffering. The kind that teaches adaptability without losing compassion. She warned that a world obsessed with winning will eventually forget how to care for those who fall behind. And when compassion disappears, progress becomes hollow. She spoke of parenting in a world that no longer pauses. She warned parents that giving children everything except time is not generosity, it is abandonment disguised as provision. She said children do not need perfect role models. They need present ones. Her words challenged the culture of constant comparison. She said comparison is the thief not only of joy, but of identity. When people live their lives trying to outdo someone else's highlight reel, they slowly abandon their own calling. She warned that fame has become a substitute for fulfillment, and recognition has replaced self-respect. She said many people are chasing applause, not because they love what they do, but because they fear being invisible. And that fear, left unchecked, will shape a world that is loud but empty. She did not speak with bitterness. There was no anger in her voice. Only clarity. The kind that comes from having nothing left to prove. She reminded the world that strength is not loud. Real strength is the ability to remain grounded while the world spins faster and faster. It is the courage to say no when everyone else is saying more. It is the wisdom to rest without guilt. She spoke of failure, not as something to be hidden, but as something to be honored. She said failure teaches humility, and humility protects the soul from arrogance. A world that does not allow failure, she warned, creates people who are terrified of truth. she said something else that unsettled many: the future will not be saved by geniuses alone. It will be saved by people who still know how to listen, who still know how to care, who still believe that character matters more than credentials. She warned leaders, quietly but directly, that influence amplifies not only ideas, but flaws. The higher one rises, the more responsibility one carries to remain accountable. Power without humility is one of the most dangerous forces the world has ever known. She spoke of hope, but not the shallow kind. The kind rooted in responsibility. She said hope is not believing everything will work out automatically. Hope is choosing to act with integrity even when shortcuts are available. She warned that the world is teaching people to build brands instead of lives, to curate images instead of cultivating character. And when image collapses, as it always does, those without inner substance are left lost. She reminded listeners that legacy is not what is remembered loudly, but what lasts quietly. The values passed down. The kindness shown when no one was watching. The courage to choose what is right over what is profitable. Her warning echoed long after she finished speaking. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. It exposed something many feel but rarely articulate: that the world is tired. That people are exhausted not from lack of opportunity, but from lack of meaning. She did not offer easy solutions. She did not pretend to have all the answers. Her warning was an invitation to slow down, to reflect, to remember that being human is not an obstacle to progress, but its foundation. She said the world does not need more heroes who burn out. It needs more people who endure, who build sustainably, who understand that the future is not a race, but a responsibility. She spoke of love, not sentimentally, but practically. Love as commitment. Love as patience. Love as the willingness to care about consequences beyond personal success. She warned that a loveless future, no matter how advanced, will be unbearable. She reminded the world that every generation believes it is standing at the edge of something unprecedented, yet the same moral questions return again and again. How do we treat each other? What do we value? What are we willing to sacrifice? And what are we not willing to lose? She said the greatest danger is not that the world will fail, but that it will succeed at the wrong things. That it will build faster machines and weaker people. That it will reach new planets while losing touch with its own soul. Her warning was not meant to frighten. It was meant to awaken. To remind people that the future is not something that happens to us, but something we shape with daily choices. She spoke as someone who has watched a child grow into a symbol, and who understands that symbols are dangerous when people forget they are human. She reminded the world that behind every name is a story, behind every success is sacrifice, and behind every warning is love. She ended not with fear, but with responsibility. She said the world still has time. Time to choose wisdom over speed. Compassion over competition. Purpose over pressure. Her words did not demand agreement. They demanded reflection. And perhaps that is why they cannot be ignored. She continued, not by raising her voice, but by deepening it, as if she were speaking to something older than trends and louder than headlines. She spoke to the part of the world that still listens when the noise fades. She said that the danger we face is not sudden collapse, but slow forgetting. Forgetting why we started. Forgetting who we are when no one is watching. Forgetting that progress was once meant to serve life, not replace it. She warned that the world is training people to think in outcomes instead of consequences. To chase results without asking who might be harmed along the way. She said that when success becomes the only language we understand, empathy becomes a foreign tongue. And when empathy disappears, even the most brilliant ideas turn cold. She spoke about loneliness, calling it the silent epidemic of a hyper-connected age. She said people have never been more visible and never felt more unseen. That messages travel instantly, yet hearts feel miles apart. She warned that a world that confuses connection with intimacy will raise generations who know how to perform, but not how to belong. She reflected on how strength is often misunderstood. Strength, she said, is not the refusal to feel, but the courage to feel deeply without being ruled by fear. She warned that when societies mock vulnerability, they create leaders who hide their wounds instead of healing them. And unhealed wounds, when given power, always leak. She spoke of ambition again, but this time with tenderness. She said ambition is not the enemy. Emptiness is. Ambition guided by meaning can lift humanity. Ambition driven by fear will consume it. She warned that many are running not toward a dream, but away from insecurity, and no amount of achievement can outrun an unexamined heart. She addressed the young, not as a critic, but as a guardian. She said the world is asking too much of them too soon, and offering too little guidance in return. Teaching them how to win, but not how to wait. How to hustle, but not how to heal. She warned that burnout is being mistaken for dedication. And exhaustion is being rewarded as excellence. She spoke of time, calling it the most abused resource of the modern age. She said people treat time as something to conquer instead of something to honor. Filling every moment, silencing every pause. She warned that a life without pauses becomes a life without reflection, and without reflection, mistakes repeat themselves at greater speed. She talked about fear in leadership, how fear often dresses itself as certainty. She said the most dangerous leaders are not those who doubt, but those who refuse to question themselves. She warned that humility is not weakness in leadership, it is protection. Protection from ego. Protection from blindness. She spoke about the temptation to dehumanize in the name of efficiency. To reduce people to data points, consumers, users, metrics. She warned that when humans are treated as means instead of ends, society loses its moral compass. Efficiency without dignity, she said, is cruelty with good branding. She shared how resilience is often misunderstood as endless endurance. She corrected this gently, saying resilience is not about never breaking, but about knowing when to bend, when to rest, and when to ask for help. She warned that glorifying self-sacrifice without limits creates a culture that feeds on its strongest until they collapse. She spoke about truth, how it has become negotiable in a world addicted to narratives. She warned that when truth becomes optional, trust disappears. And without trust, no innovation, no institution, no future can stand for long. She urged people to value honesty even when it costs them admiration. She spoke of the responsibility of influence again, this time more personally. She said being watched changes a person, and not always for the better. It tempts them to perform instead of live, to protect image instead of integrity. She warned that the higher the platform, the greater the need for grounding voices who are not impressed by power. She spoke of family, not as a traditional ideal, but as a principle of belonging. She said people thrive when they know they are loved for who they are, not what they produce. She warned that societies that replace belonging with competition will raise individuals who feel perpetually disposable. She addressed the myth of self-made success. She said no one rises alone, even if the story is told that way. There are teachers, sacrifices, unseen support, moments of grace. She warned that forgetting this breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds people to the needs of others. She spoke of compassion fatigue, how constant exposure to crisis can numb the heart. She warned that caring less is not resilience, it is retreat. She encouraged intentional compassion, the kind that chooses depth over constant exposure, presence over overwhelm. She said something quietly powerful: the future does not belong to the loudest voices, but to the most consistent values. Trends fade. Integrity endures. She warned the world not to mortgage its moral compass for temporary applause. She talked about legacy again, but more intimately. She said legacy is not what children inherit materially, but what they learn emotionally. How to treat others. How to handle failure. How to define worth. She warned that no amount of wealth can compensate for the absence of wisdom. She spoke of patience as a revolutionary act. In a world obsessed with immediacy, patience resists exploitation. It allows depth to form. It allows wisdom to catch up with capability. She warned that impatience is often disguised as urgency, but urgency without clarity leads to regret. She acknowledged the wonder of innovation, the beauty of human creativity. She did not dismiss progress. She celebrated it. But she warned that creation without conscience becomes dangerous. That every tool magnifies the heart of the one who uses it. She said the world is not broken beyond repair, but it is distracted. Distracted from listening. Distracted from caring. Distracted from asking hard questions. She warned that distraction is more dangerous than opposition, because it dulls awareness without resistance. She reminded listeners that the most meaningful changes in history did not begin with technology, but with values. With people deciding that certain lines would not be crossed. Even if crossing them promised advantage, she spoke of courage, redefining it not as bold action, but as faithful consistency. The courage to choose what is right repeatedly, quietly, without recognition. She warned that a culture addicted to dramatic moments will overlook the power of daily integrity. She paused, metaphorically, and allowed the weight of her words to settle. She did not offer comfort without challenge. She offered responsibility with hope. She said the world still has a choice. Not between progress and tradition, but between wisdom and recklessness. Between speed guided by purpose and speed driven by fear. Her warning continued to unfold, not as a threat, but as a mirror. And in that mirror, many began to see not just the world, but themselves. In the final moments of her message, she did not try to conclude in a way that felt complete, because she knew the warning was not meant to end neatly. It was meant to stay with the listener, to echo in quiet moments, to surface when the noise calmed and the mind finally had room to breathe. She spoke as if she were speaking to the future itself, not to frighten it, but to guide it gently away from a cliff it could not yet see. She said that every generation believes it is standing at the most important crossroads in history, and perhaps this time that belief is not arrogance, but responsibility. Never before, she warned, has humanity had such power to shape itself so quickly. And never before has it been so easy to forget that power without wisdom is not strength, but risk. She returned to the idea of choice, reminding the world that systems do not become cruel on their own. They are built by countless small decisions made by individuals who believed their actions were too small to matter. She warned that indifference is not neutral. It always sides with whatever is already winning. She spoke of conscience as the one voice that technology cannot replace. Algorithms can predict behavior, but they cannot decide what is right. Machines can optimize outcomes, but they cannot carry moral weight. She warned that outsourcing judgment is the fastest way to lose it. She said something deeply unsettling, yet quietly hopeful. The future will not judge us by what we created, but by what we refused to sacrifice. By the boundaries we held when crossing them would have been easier. By the people we protected when ignoring them would have been profitable. She reminded the world that being extraordinary is not the same as being good. Greatness without goodness, she warned, eventually collapses under its own emptiness. The world does not need more icons. It needs more guardians of what makes life worth living. She spoke to those who feel small in the shadow of giants. She said influence is not measured only in visibility. It is measured in impact, and impact often happens in places no camera will ever go. She warned against waiting for permission to live with integrity. Responsibility does not require an audience. She spoke of silence one last time, calling it the birthplace of wisdom. She warned that a world afraid of silence is a world afraid of itself. Without silence, there is no self-examination. Without self-examination, there is no growth. She reminded listeners that fear is a powerful motivator, but a terrible guide. Fear builds walls. Wisdom builds paths. She warned that if the future is shaped by fear alone, it will be efficient, but it will not be kind. She spoke of humility again, but now as an invitation rather than a caution. Humility, she said, is the freedom to admit we do not have all the answers. It keeps the door open to learning. It keeps the heart teachable. She warned that certainty, when it becomes rigid, is the enemy of wisdom. She acknowledged the temptation to believe that someone else will fix what feels overwhelming. She warned that waiting for saviors is a way of avoiding responsibility. Change, she said, begins where accountability is accepted, not where blame is assigned. She spoke to parents, teachers, creators, leaders, and dreamers alike, reminding them that the world children inherit will reflect the values adults practiced, not the values they preached. She warned that children listen less to words and more to priorities. She returned to love, not as a feeling, but as a discipline. Love that listens. Love that limits itself. Love that chooses the long road over the easy one. She warned that a future without disciplined love will be impressive, but unlivable. She said something quietly powerful as she neared the end: the most important work is often invisible. Healing does not trend. Character does not go viral. Integrity rarely announces itself. But these are the forces that hold civilizations together when everything else shakes. She reminded the world that hope is not optimism. Hope is courage with memory. It remembers what has been lost and still chooses to protect what remains. She warned that forgetting history does not make us progressive, it makes us repeatable. She closed by returning to where she began. Not with fear, but with care. She said the warning was not a rejection of the future, but an act of faith in it. Faith that humanity can still choose wisely. Faith that progress can still be guided by compassion. Faith that speed can still be restrained by conscience. She did not ask the world to stop moving forward. She asked it to remember what it is moving forward for, and in that final silence after her words, the warning remained, not as a threat, but as a responsibility now shared by everyone who heard it, because once a